good evening.
Good evening.
Good night and good everything to everyone all around the world. I'm thrilled to have another amazing guest today.
You've got to say who we are.
Oh, yeah, we're Voices to Dream.
Yeah.
And this is Suzanne Mann and I'm Richard Harris. And actually it's Dr. Richard Anthony Harris. That's my new identity, apparently, according to my publicity person. It's not Richard
Use
Harris
that doctor
anymore.
thing.
Yeah, you got to, because there's so many Richard Harrises around. It's not funny. It's
Mm.
I'm just another Richard Harris.
Yeah.
So yeah.
By the way, did you know surnames weren't invented until the 16th century?
Okay.
No, and I think that's a clue as to how interesting and knowledgeable our guest is going to be today.
Yes.
Or random. Or how about just random?
So we have today a chap called Chris Colbert, and he is a really interesting guy, and he's in Boston right now, and he's got this podcast called Insert Human, and I was on it a couple of months ago, and it was I think it was the best podcast by a long way in terms of me enjoying it and me getting what I wanted to talk about, because Chris gets into your brain and he gets into the meat of the topic, and he's such an experienced guy in life, in the way the world is, and I think it's just going to be a really interesting guest for us today. And thanks so much, Chris, for coming and being with us today. It's just lovely to have you.
Well, thanks for setting the bar so high I couldn't possibly reach it.
Well, I don't know.
That was cruel of you to do, Richard.
Yeah.
I'll try my best. That's all I got. I'll try my best.
Chris got a fascinating background. I mean, your dad was like an admiral, ran the European theatre. I mean, that'd be a bit of a job right now. And then you've been into innovation, like running innovation labs at Harvard. And tell us a little bit about.
Wait, you're getting into the story first thing.
Oh, okay.
No right or wrong.
No, well, I like to stick by the rules, Chris.
Okay, stick by the rules then.
Before we start, we have something that we like to do called a check-in.
Keep forgetting to check in.
Yeah, and
how can I forget the check-in?
I know. So where we just like everyone to just check in, because I guess what we're trying to do is we're trying to maybe get this idea into our listeners' heads as well about the importance of checking in with people, and that it's more than just a hi, how are you? It's a how are you checking in at this point in time? So, and just to obviously make sure we're all at ease and everything as well. So I'm going to start with Richard, and I'm going to ask Richard how he's checking in so that you get an idea of what we mean.
Okay. Well, I'm checking in exhausted from a very busy week of working up in the tropics, but it was fun as well. Full of confidence, no self-doubt, ready to go. Fascinated to hear what Chris has got to say. So I'm checking in very, very well. What about you, Suzanne? Are you checking in?
Me, I'm checking in. Hopefully this will all be gone by the time the podcast actually airs, but I'm checking in from having a week of isolation because my family's all had COVID. And I did not get it. So, but it's just been a really strange week. Having 5 people in a house, all locked in different rooms, walking around, disinfecting everywhere. It's just been really, and there was part of me that thought I could get lots done during the week, and I did nothing. I just wanted to sit and do nothing all week. So I'm checking in a little strangely.
Strange or strangely?
Maybe I'm strange, but I think I'm really, but I'm also checking in that I'm so looking forward to this conversation because I haven't really had many conversations with people this week.
Everybody's healthy though now. Everybody coming out of.
They are. It was very.
You're worried about your mum.
Yeah, especially at the beginning. My mum had been down with us, and so she ended up getting it as well. So that was very concerning and emotionally draining. And even things like my little 8-year-old now, he's a bit scared to go back to school because he doesn't want to pass it on to anyone else, even though he's past the period. So there's just a lot of emotions that go on with all of that now, I think, and we've had so much put into our minds about it over the past few years, but we have all been vaccinated now, and it's just you know, in Australia, it's everywhere right now. So yeah, that's how I'm checking in. And how about you, Chris? How are you checking in from Boston today?
I think the week, if the context is a week, the week was a journey sort of dealing with a fair amount of feeling let down by certain people in my work, certain professional relationships that just didn't pan out the way I thought they would, and just, I guess, just being frustrated for a large chunk of the week about that. And then the journey part is working through that, and I think we all would do that, right? Like these moments of darkness, ultimately we fight our way to the light. And so the light dawned yesterday for me, and started realizing, sort of rethinking a lot of those moments of frustration, and realizing what was maybe going on with the people or the organization I was talking to, or within me, and just sort of like, retrospection is a powerful thing, and you sort of like, oh, I now see what was really going on, either within me or within them. And so, and I think that if there's a lesson in there, it's along the way, not taking the bait fully.
Yeah.
You know that term, taking the bait? Is that an Australian thing?
Yeah.
That in the moment when you're feeling that frustration or that anger or that whatever you're feeling, assuming it's a dark thing, not acting on it, just like taking it and then processing it and giving yourself some time. And then again, that retrospective capacity is like, okay. Yeah. So, I end up on Saturday, today is Saturday, with clarity. So I feel pretty good about moving through what was most of the week was a difficult week, but it ends up with being a clarifying week. So that's good.
That's good. That's good.
What a good check-in.
Yeah.
You're even good at checking in and taking the bait. That's totally what Richard was actually he was describing an incident where we were trying to figure out the wording for what happened. And that's totally what happened. You took the bait. Yeah. So that was, that's happened to a few people this week.
I think we all do it. We do it at home. We do it at work. We do it in society, and we all know we do it. And I think when you do it, you never benefit.
Yeah.
And so just being mindful of, okay, these moments are a choice. Do I take the bait or not take the bait?
Yeah.
And if you can obviously not take the bait, and you end up in a better place.
Chris, how did you become this guy that you are, this sort of bastion of it, not, I know you don't particularly like the word intelligence, or you want it defined, but how did you become so intelligent, in my definition of intelligence?
How come you never asked me that?
Where did you come from? Tell us about yourself.
Well, I actually don't think I am intelligent, and I have my SAT scores to prove that. I think I had two things going for me early on. One was, you mentioned my dad, and my dad was like a terrible dad. I mean, not terrible intentionally. He was just absent because, as you mentioned, his last job was the commander-in-chief of the Allied forces in Southern Europe, which is a 4-star admiral position. And he was fighting, it was all about the free world. I mean, a lot of what's happening with NATO right now, my dad was very intimately involved in driving NATO's strengthening during the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And so the point of all that is to say, I grew up with a global context.
Yeah.
Like, we weren't sitting around the dining room table talking about sports teams. We were talking about Cold War.
Yeah.
We were talking about what was going on in the Middle East. We were talking about serious stuff. So that was a big sort of driver of how of really what I'm doing today.
Yeah.
And the second piece is kind of related. I grew up in a household that was largely devoid of human intimacy. Very structured, very, I mean, imagine you're living in this, your father's in a uniform with like medals all over, and I was raised by a nanny. So I had an English nanny, and she was my mother and my father effectively. And just so for most of my young early life, I didn't really have much human experience. It was all very mechanistic and very formal. And then as I got into early adulthood, I started realizing that. And then in my 30s, I realized how broken I was, in part because I had been raised in this pretty antiseptic environment, kind of humanless environment. And so in my 30s, I began to, I blew up my life, and I began to really do the work of understanding me and understanding emotion and understanding feeling. And then I began realizing that as I was learning about me, I was actually becoming a better leader and a better manager. And then I began realizing the whole thing is about human understanding. Not just my life, your life, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so from 35 to now, my body of work, it doesn't matter whether I worked at Harvard or ran my own company. It doesn't, those are all just sort of like almost like artifacts. What matters is the thread that I was following, the path I was trying to hoe, was how to better understand human truths in order to ensure that the outcome or the endeavor was successful through the lens of human success, not necessarily capitalist success. So a long-winded way of saying I really don't think I am intelligent. I think I've just spent the last 25 years of my life studying human. And not through the lens of sort of the sciences of psychology, everything. I mean, if you saw my reading list, you'd be like, what? But everything is about humans. It's and so I've just been kind of coming at it, and insert human is the same thing. It's examining humans through every lens possible. Sometimes the lens of me in the case of solo talks, sometimes the lens of brilliant people like you, Richard. But it's all pointing to the same question: is what does it mean to be human? And in understanding ourselves, better understanding ourselves, how do we apply that to ensure that the endeavor, whatever it might be, results in greater benefit for more people? And so what's interesting about that, and I think the reason why people think I'm intelligent, is because not that many people do what I just said. In fact, I think a lot of people ignore their human. And Chris, from age 0 to 35, ignored his human. Didn't even know he had one.
You weren't taught to learn about it.
But now, what does it mean for our listeners? Now, I love the human side of things, but what does it mean, Chris, for our listeners who are like, what on earth is he talking about? Your human, and studying your human. What do you mean?
So it's a great question. There are dimensions of existence. And for most people, the dimension that we hold onto is the mechanistic dimension of survival. And if you think about it, Maslow's hierarchy of need, Maslow, I'm assuming. And the first level of need is physiological. The second level of need is safety. The third level of need is belonging. Most people define who they are and how they are, and whether it's good or bad, through those 3 levels. The next 2, so that's pretty mechanistic, frankly. Do I have food? Do I have water? Do I have walls to protect me from the woolly mammoth and the saber-toothed tiger? And then the love and belonging is, am I not alone? And that could be, I have a wife, I have a husband, or I have whatever, I have a pet, I don't know, but it's pretty mechanistic. The next two levels, self-esteem and self-actualization, are where it gets really interesting, because that's where the human stuff is. You know, self-esteem, you know, the enemy of self-esteem is fear, right? And we are riddled with it. And fear has the cousin doubt and anxiety and worry and regret and shame. That's in all of us. And then when you get to self-actualization, that requires actually knowing self, knowing one's innermost desires and innermost passions, knowing one's innermost strengths. In order to do that, you have to look in the mirror.
Oh no,
And
that's going to be hard for a
who
lot of
the
people.
hell wants to do? Who the hell wants to do that? So the complexity of those two, the last two levels of Maslow, is what causes most people to avoid it and to hold on to the mechanistic form of human, physiological safety and love and belonging, and define their life that way. And if you look at me at the age of 35, mechanistically, I was killing it. I was a very successful CEO with a very successful company and a lovely house and a lovely car, and you know, the whole thing. But it was completely devoid of my human.
So was it also
self-esteem?
Yeah, you weren't happy? Was it because, like, I mean, is this, for me, part of this sort of comes down to this thing of people not finding their happiness, maybe?
Yeah, I think so. I think my only hesitance about happy is I think
happy at a lower level.
Yeah, I mean, there's all different.
True.
That's exactly right, Richard. I mean, I think there's all different dimensions of that. That word is viewed. Happy is like, I'm happy. You know, where's fulfilled in that? Where's challenged in that? Like for my kind of human, I need challenge. We were talking about moving to the Bahamas. I'm not sure that, you know, that I don't know if I could self-actualize in Nassau. Maybe I could. I could be wrong. But I think it was less a matter of being unhappy and more a matter of realizing that my human wasn't part of my operating equation. And I'll give you a quick story. Two things happened that year that were pivotal.
I was going to ask if you had a Damascus moment, or was it a gradual thing? But yeah.
Yeah, well, I think there was a moment, and two things happened within the course of like 6 months. Well, three things. I'll tell you all three. Number one is I read an article in Fast Company, and there was a reference to a quote by Oliver Wendell Holmes, who once said, "Who you are should come before what you do." And I read that, and I remember that day as if it was like 10 minutes ago. I thought to myself, I have no idea who I am. I'm looking it up, those words in black and white, and I have no idea who I am. A couple months later, a friend of mine randomly calls me and says, "Hey, you want to go to a psychic with me?" And I'm like, not something I would normally do. Sure. So off we go to Alex at the Tremont Tea Room, which is coincidentally like not that far from here. And Alex is this very strange guy. His eyes sort of roll back in his head. He's rather large. And he keeps asking me these questions that go something like, "So Chris, how do you feel about X, Y, or Z?" And apparently I kept responding with, "Well, Alex, I think ABC." And Alex at some point got angry with me, and he said, "Chris, I don't care what you think. I want to know what you feel."
Oh.
And I thought to myself, I have no idea. Just like I had no idea with the Oliver Wendell Holmes quote, I had no idea what he was talking about. I mean, I'm not exaggerating, guys. I am like, I don't know what that means. And then the final thing that happened was my now ex-wife and I had a Thanksgiving party, the day after Thanksgiving, and we had 100 people to our house. And I realized the next day that the entire party, all I had done, I had a bottle of red in one hand, a bottle of white in the other, and I just filled glasses all night, being the host. But really what I was doing was avoiding emotion, was avoiding intimacy. And so the next day, I was just, that morning when I woke up and realized that, I said, enough, this is enough. So I wasn't overtly unhappy, to your point, Suzanne. I just knew something wasn't right.
Yeah.
And so I began doing the work. And in doing the work, I began realizing I'm not alone. Like you go into this stuff thinking, oh, I'm the one that's screwed up, and then you start realizing, you talk to people and you start sharing. Probably my superpower in all this is my willingness to tell the truth about everything.
Yes.
Yeah. And some people run away from it because, emotional intimacy. I actually broke up with a friend of mine the other day, a guy that I've known for years, and we went out for dinner and he just couldn't go there. And I finally said, Hank, I don't think this works. I need to live my truth. I need to put it on the table, because it's still, in putting it on the table, I learn. Because that's the other thing. Now, I'll never forget going to see the Dalai Lama, and somebody in the audience asked a question about self-actualization, and he's a really, I don't know if you've ever seen him. He's just a wonderful, amazing human being. And he just kind of laughed, and he goes, I'm not even close. Yeah. Meaning, like, this is forever. Until we die. Like, every day is an opportunity to learn more. And yeah, to learn about all these many facets and all these many complexities of being human. So I don't know.
What have you found to be the most useful way? You've had that, you're probably 37 now, so you've had a couple of years to think about all of this now. What have you learned as the best way of learning to be human? And you've got this amazing podcast where you're talking to interesting people. What have you learned? What are the best sort of things that have come out from that you've picked up?
That's a great question. By the way, it's so fun being the guest. I like interviewing people, but I like being the guest.
I love asking questions too.
It's like when, I do a lot of speaking, and sometimes the conferences or the corporations will ask me if I'm also willing to moderate a panel. I'm like, can I just talk? I think the number one thing I've learned about how to learn about being human is forgiveness. Yeah. Which is to say, you have to be, it's like this past week, I talked about the frustration that I had with certain relationships and certain people. Ultimately, I forgave them, but more importantly, I forgave myself. There was a little bit of an impetuous child reaction I had to like one of them. There was you have to own that all these relationships are two-way.
Yeah.
We like to believe we are right. We are perfect. And that whatever's not right is their fault. And so forgiveness of self and allowing one's darkness to be, and being and hugging it as readily as we hug our lightness. Which is not to say we aren't on the quest to evolve. We aren't on the quest to let go of some of our our fears, our anger, our shame, our worry, our doubt, it's right. That's the project, but to be okay with it. Like one of the greatest accomplishments of my life, going back to Alex asking me if I could feel, which I couldn't, is I've theorized in my wacky brain that there are 26 emotions. And I don't even know why that number, but I might have read something along the way. But at the top of the scale, or maybe on the right of the scale, is elation, and at the far end of the other scale is dejection, or whatever. But I believe the journey is about feeling the entire scale all the time.
Yeah.
Like anger is okay. Anger constantly is bad.
Yeah.
Sadness, okay. Anxiety, okay. It's when the stuff becomes sort of stuck,
yeah,
where I think it becomes a big problem. So back to your question, I think number one is forgiveness. Number two is the power of observation. Like I have the ability to remove myself from myself and watch. You're like, oh, that's interesting that you reacted that way.
Yeah.
And so by being able to remove yourself from yourself, you're like, okay, what happened just then, really?
Yeah.
What was underneath that? What was coming forward from your upbringing that might have caused you to translate what was being said that way, or to overreact the way you did? And so I think learning how to observe oneself, and it's a form of, like, introspection is within, right? I'm talking about almost extrospection, but instead of looking at the world, you're actually looking at yourself.
Yeah.
Well, and it comes down to actually taking the time to do it, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And
I'll give you a quick anecdote to that. So I went out for a drink with my son's boss the other day. It's a long story why that happened, but he's a really wonderful guy, and I'd never met him before. And we, was meet at a bar, and he's right out of the gate. He goes, "I have two questions for you." I'm like, "Oh, okay." I didn't know that was the agenda, but what he goes, "Can you tell me how to be a better parent? And can you explain to me how to help how to transform a company?" I'm like, "Oh,
they're easy, so easy."
Too easy.
Well, I mean, the funny thing, guys, is in both cases I brought Maslow into the equation. But my point about, we talked about parenting, he said, and I explained to him sort of my views on parenting, and he said, the challenge is I'm working so hard. And he does have a huge job, and it's just like, I just don't have the time. And I'm like, I actually don't think this is about extra time. I think this is a choice.
Yeah.
In other words, how do we use the time with our kids? How do we use the time between when we're with our kids, when we're not with the kids, to think about our kids, to think about them through the lens of Maslow, to think about our intentions for them? And the same is true for the work that I do. I go to the gym, I'm on the treadmill, I'm doing whatever. I can think about the Ukraine through the human truth. I can choose to think about sports, and it's a choice. And I think finding your human, and or figuring out how to insert more human into your relationships, into your work, anything, it's not actually extracurricular or a heavy lift. And for me, by the way, I find it profoundly, it makes everything I do profoundly interesting. It's moving everything from the mechanistic to the humanistic, and we know humanism is sloppy and complicated, and there's all the chock full of all this stuff that just makes anything we do interesting.
And you've been concentrating a lot on what you call the three pillars: health, education, and the financial systems. And you've been talking to people about that. And what have you kind of, and you've been crystallizing it in a book, I understand.
Yep.
How are you putting all that together? And tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I think the mess we've gotten ourselves into as a species is largely a function of a lack of clear intention for the species, coupled with two unstewarded forces that we unleashed decades ago. We had no idea what they were going to do. One force is capitalism, and I'm really talking about the Western world. One force is capitalism and the other force is technology. So here we are as a group of people. We aren't clear about the goal for the people. And then we let go these two marauding beasts called capitalism and technology.
Yeah.
And then because there's quick economic success, like economic growth, we're like, this is great. And so what do? We then start molding or bending the core systems of society, education, healthcare, and finance, to promulgate that economic growth.
Yeah.
And then what we do, because it's so profoundly, effective, is we start pulling out the human threads that had been there before, because they're not that productive. They actually make things messier. They're complicated. The whole job is to build an economic juggernaut.
Yeah.
And the theory is everybody will win. But when you start pulling out the human threads, like look at education, in the old days in higher education, humanism or the humanities were part of the entire curriculum.
Yeah.
They were woven across the whole thing. But as we got fixated on productivity and cranking out people ready to work, ready to be, titans of industry, we turned the thread into its own bucket and it became an elective.
Yeah.
Like being human is now on the list of courses you could take.
And not many people pick it, do they?
Not many people pick it because the whole measure of a life is economic success.
That's right.
Not human success, economic success. We did the exact same thing in healthcare. We've done the exact same thing in finance. We just sucked the human out of the whole thing. And then we allowed the juggernauts or the marauding whatevers to define the success.
Yeah.
And I think so what I'm seeing, and here's the good news, and we talked about this a little earlier. I'm seeing a movement. I have no dearth of people to interview on my show, because there are people in healthcare, education, finance, and beyond who are trying to figure out how to reset the core systems of modern society to put human understanding and human outcomes, human benefits first.
Yeah.
Without derailing the economic engine.
So
we do need economic growth. I'm not challenging GDP as one measure, but I am challenging it as the measure.
Yeah.
I'm not challenging a person's ability to make money as a measure of their life, but I am going to say at the end, you're not going to look back and count how much money you made. You're going to look back and say, was that life a life of meaning? Was it a life of consequence? Was it a life of true fulfillment? So there are I'm going to guess hundreds of thousands of individuals and organizations, and I include you too, that are putting a spotlight on the issue, and they're working to change it. I mean, the UN is trying, but I think, there are lots of organizations.
And that's, well, and that is exactly what we're trying to do here as well, because we're trying to let people know that it's through having these sort of conversations, and every voice, we're voices too, but every voice has that potential to make a difference in someone else's life, to make it, and in someone else's life can actually then break out to be the systems and the bigger, the bigger world around us. So that's exactly right. That's truly
and that was going to be my third thing around all this in terms of what I'm learning about
Mm.
about being human, is you have to find I call it your tribe. You have to find people, and that doesn't mean they're exactly the same place, but firstly, they're not uncomfortable talking about this stuff, and some
Yeah.
people are.
Yeah.
Mm.
And what I've found is talking, like Richard, we're like, oh my God, and it gives you motivation, and it gives you new ways of thinking, and it makes you feel not alone, and you translate it into hope. And for me, what it's also turned into is an amazing collection of friends around the world.
Yeah.
Who Richard and I have never been in the same room, but I think of him as a friend. And one day I'm gonna be in Sydney, and we're gonna,
Same.
so you realize there already is a movement. There already are these people. But the way somebody asked me recently, how do you find them? And I said, well, this kind of goes back to forgiveness. Imagine you walk into a cocktail party and you speak Swahili and nobody else speaks Swahili, and you just start speaking Swahili, and some people are like thrown off by your Swahili-ness and they like run away. But one or two people walk over to you and they actually speak Swahili too. And the next thing you know, you're like locked in on this amazing conversation in Swahili. And that's what I'm finding is everywhere I go, I'm polarizing. Either people run away or they want to hug me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's putting yourself, it's putting yourself out there, isn't it? And that's which again for me comes back. So Chris, I don't know if you know, but yeah, so I call myself the challenge girl. And
I did see that. I don't actually know why is that? Because you're challenging?
But maybe I'm a little challenging. I like to challenge because I think when I had my sort of aha moment of finding my human, I realized that I needed to challenge myself more. And now I challenge myself, and I like to think I challenge the people around me to push a bit deeper, to go a bit further, to keep investigating and learning and putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations, because it might be uncomfortable to start, but then that's how you do meet the most amazing people, or whatever, whatever it is. So for me, I
think that's exactly right.
I can completely relate to that.
I am very aware of my mortality, not in a morbid way, but in a really helpful and frankly motivating way. Like, I don't have that many years left.
You had that guest on the other day, and you were mentioning that LED light in the kitchen.
Yeah.
That was fascinating. That actually triggered something in my brain too.
Well, now you've got to tell me what it is, because I haven't heard that part.
Well, it's the idea. Well, actually, there are two devices I've used in my talks, and I referenced one of them in my book. It's this idea that imagine in your kitchen there was an LED display that had the number of days, hours, minutes, and seconds you had left on the earth.
You tell me that. Yes.
In fact, I have to give a talk in Panama next month, and they asked me to talk about this. They don't want me to talk about like corporate innovation. They actually want me to talk about this. This is what we've been talking about. I'm like, really? You want me to talk about that? I'm like, yes. Which also reveals this is the largest ATM network in Central America. They want me to be a keynote at their annual summit and talk about human.
Wow.
Fantastic.
So that's people. That's hope.
Yeah.
But the other one I use, which is equally powerful, is I talk about, imagine one day you're walking down the street and you see a cinema, a movie theater marquee, the big sign out front, and the title of the movie playing is Your Life. And it's your life, Suzanne. And you buy a ticket and you go in and you sit down. There's nobody else in the theater, and the movie starts playing, and it's a 2-hour movie, and you're sitting there watching your life. And the question at the end of that movie, do you give it a standing ovation?
Oh, no.
Or do you walk out thinking, missed opportunity, did boring?
Wow, I know. I was going to say, what if I fall asleep?
Fell asleep. not much of a movie, didn't take risk, didn't push envelope, didn't engage interesting people, didn't try, didn't, you know, like what kind of movie do you want to make?
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, that's, I think, as
like
powerful as the
I like
LED
it.
one, because
Yeah.
like I want to make a great fucking movie.
I think you will for sure. I mean, you are. It's a great movie.
Well, I
so
mean,
far.
I mean, like, if I got taken out today, I mean, you said something, Suzanne. I would go happily knowing two things or three things. Number one, I've taught my children the importance of truth. Number two, I have an amazing people in my life, including you two. And number three, I tried.
Yeah, that's some
Doesn't mean
some
I
good stuff.
succeeded. It just means
Succeeding.
I did not try.
Yeah.
You know, and I'll just say this: that every moment of every day is a choice to try or not try, to take risk or to not take risk, to hide or to expose oneself. One of my new favorite metaphors that I've been using is this idea that we live in boxes, and society, modern society, has created the sense that the job is to get out of one box and get into another box. And many of our relationships are boxes, and work is a box, and the boxes are safety. You know, back to Maslow, boxes are safety, and if there are other people in the box, that's love and belonging. So boxes like work, but they don't really work, because a life should not be a box. It should not be a collection of boxes. A life should have no walls, right? It should be one massive exploration of self. And the journey of realizing one's truth and doing that with people you love, like no boxes, people.
Yeah.
So every day is, and I'm actually talking to this kid, and this random young man, 19 years old, reached out to me. It's like, can I talk to you? And he's like, Chris, my entire school, every one of my peers at school is fixated on graduating and getting into their career box. Like, and their parents are like, you got to find your career box. I'm like, how could a 22-year-old know what box they should get in? That makes no sense to me. I think at least the first 3 years after college, you should just travel the world, meet as many people as possible, do as many jobs as possible. I mean, it's like marrying somebody after one date. Like, who in their right mind would do that? You know, so
it's rules.
I don't know.
Well, isn't it? Oh,
no,
gosh.
that's fantastic insight, Chris.
I know. I could keep talking about this forever. I find it so interesting.
Well, I could too. It annoys my wife to no end.
Well, I'm gonna bring us to our imagining
focus.
part. Chris was talking earlier about having a focus, having a goal, and what is our actual goal that we're trying to achieve here. And so what we try to do in each podcast is imagine what that could be. And so we've picked a little section from an interesting book we have about imagining.
I've heard about that book.
And I guess we wanted your insight into it, because we find it, I mean, I think there's so many different things to pick out in this little section, but it's a lot about democracy, and we'll just see what you think. So I'm going to read a little part. This is to put this into context.
So it's this is a professor who's sort of giving a lecture 60 years after Imagine Day, and he's describing what happened, you know, how they developed democracy after Imagine Day. And I know you're got a fear of technology, but I guess maybe in your book you're integrating it to be a useful thing as well. So
I don't have let me be clear. I don't have a fear against technology. I think the issue with technology is not technology. The issue with technology is we unleashed it with no consideration of who manages technology.
Well, which I think this sort of touches on as well. And just so everyone understands, Imagine Day is the day that everyone in the world becomes compassionate, becomes thoughtful, actually cares about each other.
Mm.
So this is 60 years after, and this professor is talking about what's happened since then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Within a few weeks, the global democracy was taking shape. Almost everybody on the planet had access to the collective wisdom, and people were inventing systems to make the most of both cerebral knowledge and physical skills that people possessed. Obvious needs for education, farming, irrigation, and food distribution were rapidly reformed. The real work was in organizing the best minds to come together to provide leadership on a global scale. The systems were designed to allow both the introvert and the extrovert to contribute equally to the system. Weightings were assigned by both artificial intelligence methods and mass human assessments of proposals. People put forward ideas and problems in terms of the organization of territories, traditional lands, and former countries, and where critical needs were and how best to address them. Discussion forums of every type, face-to-face, academic, social, medical, in online chat discussions, in blogs and tweets, in news reports and journal pieces were gathered, noted, assessed, and collated. With the combination of advanced AI and dedicated human determination and hard work, the very best ideas and policies that people agreed could and should be implemented were quickly implemented. From these practical outcomes and from the analysis of who had the abilities to coordinate, shape, and achieve outcomes, the leaders of the new world emerged. Weightings toward not only academic and technical knowledge were factored into the progression of the leaders, but also proven compassion and empathy.
Mm.
That last sentence is my favorite. I love compassion.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
So
Who wrote that? I'm kidding. That was a joke.
What do you think? What do you think? Is it possible?
About
Or
what?
is it possible? Is this the world that we're actually after? Is a global democracy something that could ever happen? Are people ever going to actually look for leaders for their compassion and empathy, as well as their academic and technical knowledge?
I believe it is not only possible, I think it is essential and maybe even inevitable. What I wrote in my book, the governing systems of the world today, here's what's happened. There's a collision between the issues we have, which are global, and the construct for governments, which is national, right? And so the existential threats we face are global. They know no borders. They don't care about borders.
Yeah.
Pandemics don't care about borders.
No.
Cyber terrorism doesn't care about borders. Negative birth rates doesn't care about
Climate
none of the
change.
existential threats. Climate doesn't care about borders. And so the national governments aren't equipped to solve global problems, and the global governments are fully emasculated entities. I mean, look at the World Health Organization's handling of the global pandemic. They don't have the power to do anything. They have the power to plea. And so I think over time, more and more of us will realize that we are one people. Like, I don't believe in borders or countries or continents, or we're all related, man. Like, we're distant cousins. And so we have to figure out a way to create a global governing system that is able to not just address these issues, but is able to reinforce our interdependence. You know, this, I don't know, I'm sure you've been reading stuff about how the Ukraine is going to cause the globalist thing to go away, and we're going to go back to nationalist, a collection of countries, and global commerce is going to end. I'm like, bullshit.
Yeah.
this train is too far down the track. We're never going to reset on that. It's only going to keep going forward. And so, yes, we will need to figure out a global governance, global democracy that works for all the people and that captures a lot or reflects a lot of what Richard wrote about. But here's the rub. And this is why I talk about the need for a human revolution in my book. We are not going to get there on the back of the entities that currently, quote unquote, run the world.
No.
The US government is not going to drive the creation of a global democracy. The autocracies around the world are not going to drive the creation of a global democracy.
So who's going to do it? How's it going to get done?
We have to do it. Just like, every revolution since the beginning of revolutions, the we was the people. At some point, the people said, this isn't working.
Yeah.
Pick a revolution. They're all the same. At some point, the majority of the people said, this isn't working. Not just for me individually, it's not working for us collectively. And we need to work together to figure out how to topple or replace or whatever the current regimes and or demand a different way of running this thing called the world. I mean, we do have some good news happening, which is climate. Climate is at our door. And right now, we're still playing the bullshit games of nationalistic, China's not doing shit, Russia doesn't care, India's whatever. But at some point, it's going to get really real for everybody. At some point, and there's a tipping point where the climate disasters and its annihilation of millions and millions of people around the world, the loss of property, the loss of everything, at some point is going to get so bad. And I'm not being a doomsdayer. This is like proven. We know this is going to happen.
Yeah.
The sad part about humans is, the only two motivators of behavior change are aspiration or desperation. We suck at being motivated by aspiration, so we need desperation. So we're going to need calamity at a global level to actually unite to figure out how to reset and redefine the whole thing.
Yeah.
Which I think will need to look a lot like what Richard depicted. But sadly, we're going to have to wait for that day. Now, what we can do, we, the people, can start being activists now and start stepping into the role of demanding change in our communities, in our cities, in our countries, in our world. Yeah. Like I mentioned before, hundreds of thousands of people, organizations, and individuals doing the kind of work that you guys are doing. We need to be millions. Yeah. I read recently that if you want to create a movement, you want to create a successful revolution, you need at least 10% of the population involved. Yeah. So if there's 7.8 billion people on the planet, or whatever the number is, call it 800 billion, or 8 billion rather, we need 800 million.
I guess one of the problems is coordinating, even if people have the right sentiment and want to change, how you coordinate that sort of thing. Like that's a tricky thing, because you've got the structures that are kind of suppressing in many countries. You can't say it. You can't mention the word war in Russia, or in China, there's no freedom of speech.
Yeah, I would be presumptuous to imply that I have any real answers. I will say the work I'm doing with the book and this idea of a human revolution is going to culminate in creating an organization called the Human Revolution. I bought the URL, so I'm like halfway there.
So we get to join. We get to join the Human Revolution.
The idea of it is kind of two levels, at least, of function. One is aggregation of effort. So you can go on the site and find all the different organizations and individuals working on different aspects of the problem, whether the problem is intention setting, how do we define human progress? The problem is redefining systems, education, healthcare, finance, or other systems, or the problem is individual behavior. Because all three levels you got to do all three. You can't do any of them. So one is aggregation of all that effort, because there are literally hundreds of thousands of entities, including you guys, that the world needs to be able to see, like, oh, there already is a movement.
Mhm.
And then underneath that is the ability to connect people to other people, person to person, who are working at some level on some aspect of this thing that they want to learn from, relate to, share with. So it's literally like it's like social media for the cause. And it can be, one of the things I think Suzanne said that I just want to reinforce, every little bit helps, including you working on you.
Yeah.
You finding your human will ultimately help the movement. The more people who speak Swahili, the better our chance.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be some massive undertaking. It doesn't have to be global. It can be within the confines of your home.
Yeah.
Which is,
But so go ahead.
well, I was going to say, which is what we we try to come back to in this as well, because we want to talk about these systems issues, but then we want to leave everyone with something that they can do today that's going to help them, you know, that's going to help them move forward.
So one of my, maybe there's a good way to wrap up on, from me anyway, one of my statements or beliefs is this: that behavior is the root of all actions, all decisions, and all consequences.
Right. Can you say that again? You got to say that again for me.
Behavior, human behavior is the root of all actions, all decisions, and all consequences. And this gets to this human understanding thing. Our behaviors are what creates consequence. We behave one way, we create this consequence. We behave another way, we create this consequence. A behavior is deciding to act. That behavior is deciding to be introspective, to be introspective. Like everything we've been talking about in terms of our choices are ultimately behaviors. And so if we can motivate, and I've said to people, if we can't motivate behavior change at an individual level, game over.
Yeah.
Systems change, policies alone will not solve climate. Unless they're so refined in terms of carrots and sticks that if you don't do X, you'll be terminated. You know, unless it gets to that level. But I don't think that'll work. So we have a choice as a species to begin to change our behaviors, to get closer to our human, and to band together to demand the world gets closer, not just to humans, but to all life. You know, like we haven't even talked about other species and what we're doing to them. But again, my point is, it all begins with us. Like we can sit here and wait for the government to solve the problem. I don't think it ain't happening.
No.
I mean, yeah. Not happening.
Chris, fantastic. I love talking to you. I love talking to you. You're an amazing guy.
I have to say,
Wacky.
I have to say as well, and I know we're going to ask you where to find out information about you and that as well. But I got onto your website and started reading some of your blogs. And I've printed heaps of them out here, and you can see I've even been highlighting them because
which one is that first one? What's that first one you're looking at?
The Virus of Fear.
Oh yeah.
They were some of my favorite. The Virus of Fear, Lead Us. Where have all the grown-ups gone? And how is your integrity doing? These were some of my favorite ones. But you know what I love, and what I wanted to point out to our listeners in that as well, is that the way you write, I can hear you saying it to me. You know, I can hear you just talking to me about this, and I find it's really easy to read. It's not like as if, you know, I guess this is the thing. I feel like sometimes people think, you know, when they're trying to find their human, that it is all of this like really intellectual, you know, big words and stuff, but it's not. It just comes down to just, it's simple. It's like, it's the simplest thing we can do, but we all find it so difficult. And that's what I sort of found in your blogs as well, that I would recommend to all of our listeners.
Thank you for reading it.
Yeah.
I would say that I get that feedback a lot on my writing and my speaking. But I think that is the point, right?
Yeah. It's human. You're being
We're
human.
just being human. We're just talking to each other, and we don't need to layer into it fancy language or sophisticated stuff. We just need to communicate.
Mm.
And I think, again, back to like how to do this, finding other people that want to speak the same language, want to converse about it, is really, really key.
I love deep conversations. I've actually decided in my in life, I quite often with my friends now say that well, it's sort of like how you said you sort of moved away from one of your friends.
Yeah.
I only want to have deep conversations, or
Yeah.
they're not, but have conversations with meaning. For me in life now,
Yeah.
I've reached that point.
One quick thought there, just sort of consistent with what we've been talking about for the audience. Think of yourself as a curator. Your life is a curatorial opportunity. Curating, you know what that word means,
Yeah.
curating, right? So how are you curating the people around you, the work you're doing, the play you're having, in your case with your kids, the experience? It's all of it is choice, and you put the choice through the lens of desire and intent, and you have these many curatorial opportunities. The one that people are worst at is, frankly, is friends. There's a tendency, at least in American society, like your friends are just the people you assembled along the way. But if you put those friends through a filter of, are these friends that can add meaning to me and that I can add meaning to them? Are these friends on the same path, not necessarily in the same place, but seeking to better understand what it means to be human, seeking to grow personally, professionally, or not? And that doesn't mean you eschew all people that are not, but it does mean, I think, curatorially, you're working to make sure that the weighting is right. That the number of people you have in your life who are capable of speaking Swahili or learning how to speak Swahili is growing. And that the other people, that number over time gets less and less. Because this is like I said to somebody yesterday, I'm militant about who I hang out with. Because I don't have that much time.
That
clock's
going down, isn't it?
The clock's going down. So if I'm spending a lot of time in non-meaningful relationships where the other person isn't interested in Swahili, the opportunity cost of that is huge. So anyway, I need to stop talking.
No, that's why we're so grateful for the time that you've given to us.
Thanks so much.
And how can we find out about you, Chris?
We can just call me.
Okay, do you want to give our listeners your number?
But you do, Chris, you do all sorts of stuff.
617-448.
You do, you write, you speak, you've spoken in many huge forums, haven't you? And I can just imagine you as a keynote speaker anywhere would be just amazing. But what do you love to do? I mean, the podcast is fun. I mean,
so we've got insert human.
And you've got your website, chriscolbert.com.
Yeah. Let me answer the
.org,
sort of functional question.
chriscolbert.org?
No, chriscolbert.com. So chriscolbert.com is my website, and that has, as my daughter once said to me, "Dad, you have a lot of content." And I'm not sure how she intended that, but it has a lot of content. Everything I've written, not everything, a lot of things I've written, my speeches, my podcasts, my books. Insert Human is available on all the podcast platforms. But you can also email me, chris@chriscolbert.com. And this is, talking to people is a big part of what I do. So don't be, whoever is listening, if you want to talk to me, talk to me. And I'm happy to chat. Richard, I think your question was sort of what really kind of floats my boat. This does. Like, you got to remember the 35-year-old who didn't know how to feel.
You've come a little way.
So every day that I feel, and every day that I realize I have these relationships that allow me to evolve my capacity to feel and to understand self and others, is a bonus day.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that I don't have shitty days. Of course I have shitty days, but generally speaking, what excites me is this.
Yeah.
You know, and whether I'm standing on a stage or doing this, or it's all the same thing. You know, it's just and this idea that this Panama ATM company wants me to talk about this is wild.
So cool. I love it.
Yeah. The delight of your style with your podcast and the way you ask questions and interact, you can tell how much you're just enjoying it. It's fantastic to watch and to listen to.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I interviewed somebody recently and they're like, that was so fun. That was amazing. How are you able to do that? And I'm like, that's a weird, and I said, I think it's because I genuinely care.
Yeah.
I listen well because I actually care about what's being said.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
anyway, very true.
I should let you guys go.
No, well, we've got to wrap up. You can't wrap up today, Chris. We've got to.
We can do a marathon, the world's longest podcast.
Yeah, I know. We go on. And we don't edit. It's just.
We don't edit. No.
But remember, really depressing.
If you liked to our listeners out there, if you liked the podcast, like, share,
comments.
Subscribe.
We love comments.
We love comments.
Yeah, lots to comment.
People get scared to comment, but just comment.
Are we going to check out, or are we just going to go?
No, I think we better just go because we've gone a long time. We had such a good check-in.
Oh, you do that on the end? You do a checkout thing? That's cool.
Sometimes, usually when we have forgotten to check in.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, but we're going to go. Thank you so much, Chris Colbert. Everyone contact him. He is fabulous.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for having me on the show, and congratulations, and look forward to more conversation.
Thank you.
Likewise.